Okay, you mentioned previously that your betting sort of ceased when your mum sadly passed away. I wouldn't mind me bringing the subject of your mum up again, but you're on record as saying that her death hit you hard. And do you feel that employers and welfare departments give enough credit to people, sympathetic enough when they're grieving, as opposed to being ill or?
I mean, nobody was unsupportive to me, but I mean, I'm freelance as well, though, so it's sort of slightly different. You're fending for yourself with everything with a freelance, so I suppose I didn't expect anything active. It was also a weird point for it to happen because obviously COVID was happening, so it probably isn't. My experience probably isn't necessarily the best example. Perhaps, I don't know. I found that people were sympathetic. My problems were more to do with, I suppose, this is probably when I made these comments about confidence. So it seemed to attack my confidence in some kind of way, and that made it much more difficult, challenging to present television. I certainly found it to be so. And it's very difficult to show weakness in that environment because confidence is about coming across well and the viewer enjoying it. If the viewer feels that the presenter is tentative or whatever, it's a lot less enjoyable for them. So it's partly not getting the job done properly. It's also not getting the best out of the subjects around you, or not testing a issue in the way that you should or would usually have tested it. And it's a very competitive environment. So, there is a fear, and I think this might be what your question is getting at. I think there is a fear that people have that if they are wrestling with a problem like this, that if they mention it or talk about it, that people will say that they're not up to the job. And I think that fear still exists, whether or not it's legitimate. And in some cases that exists for a reason. Television is cutthroat. Lots of industries are. And you have to keep being as good as you can.
Okay. On a lighter note, your written work. Tell us a bit about Tortoise.
So Tortoise Media, yeah. This was a venture, put together by James Harding, who was the editor of the Times. I used to write for the Times in their racing pages, and in particular, I used to work with the sports editor Keith Blackmore, and Keith is working for James in Tortoise Media, and he asked me, would I like to write for them? So they produce quarterly magazines. They're sort of like little books, actually. And they have an online presence. They also have this thing called Think-ins, where they take a subject and they have their members, because it's a sort of membership organisation, which does obviously risk being conceived to be or actually elitist. That's the problem with it, isn't it? That you might be just talking to the converted. But I suppose that's a problem that lots of channels, lots of media face at the moment, isn't it? In that, you can choose where you get your news. So maybe a subscription version isn't that different. Anyway, so Tortoise Media have these sessions called Think-ins, where they take a subject and they get 3 experts to talk about it, and they have experts in the audience and also their members, and they discuss a subject to sort of take the whole kind of idea and thoughts forward. It's quite interesting. It's very interesting. I enjoy working for them. So I have written about my love of horse racing. I wrote a piece about why I love horse racing. And then I was obviously writing for people who had the whole, it's not even just a sporting audience, Tortoise, they're kind of like the whole thing. So that includes people who maybe, without thought, reflexively, hate racing without ever really sort of thinking why they might hate racing. So you're talking to a whole load of different people. Now, obviously, clearly, they might not actually, they might go, horse racing, I'm not reading that. But the key is to try and speak to people who wouldn't normally read about horse racing. So I've written about why I love horse racing. I've written about welfare and injuries, fatalities, improvements, the whole kind of conversation around that. I've written about the Robbie Dunn, Bryony Frost case. I've written about Rachel Blackmore, and I've got a couple of projects ongoing at the moment for them as well. So yeah, I really enjoy it because I'm kind of connecting to a different audience, and that is, that's a skill, isn't it? You have to, connect with different people at different times. So I mean, Racing TV, we have our members; they're incredibly knowledgeable. So you're talking to them, at the sort of this level because they know at least as much as you do. So you have to have huge respect for them. Now, I'm of the view that you should always have huge respect for your audience. That's part of the thing that bothers me about the dumbing down idea of things, because I just don't think that's respectful to the people that you're talking to. I think that's wrong. But anyway, so then there's Sporting Life audience, which is more of a sporting audience, and I write for them as well. And then you've got a Tortoise audience who could just be, as I said, anybody, including people who don't like racing.
Well, the people that do like racing, you keep them busy with the roads to Cheltenham, Aintree and Punchestown. Now, longish question, but do you think the road starts too early, and is there a danger that it will eventually find the destination is underwhelming, diluted and proliferated with odds-on shots?
Well, I think there is a risk of that. I mean, if we take the Cheltenham National Hunt Race Programme as separate from Road to Cheltenham, the series, I'll come back to that. So if you take the programme in itself, yeah, I do think that jumps racing has an issue in terms of its graded races, particularly at grade 2 level, and providing stimulating competitive races after Cheltenham's November meeting around either side of Christmas up until Cheltenham. In Cheltenham, increasingly, you've got the opportunity to dodge a key rival by running in a race that's only slightly different to before. I mean, if you think about the differential between the key races in the 3-day festival as compared to a 4-day festival, they were much larger. They pushed funneled horses together more so than they do at Cheltenham. I'm not suggesting that it's in any way likely that we'll go back to a 3-day festival, because clearly that ship has sailed. But I don't think we should be going towards a 5-day festival, even if that involves in the short term just 2 extra races. I think there needs to be I think the rest of the season needs to be looked at. I was part of a group that did do that. We're trying to get some recommendations through. I don't know where that is at the moment. But as I said earlier in this interview, I think there should be an Anglo-Irish jumps pattern, because it's the same pool of horses, it's a small pool of horses, and I think we should be encouraging greater competition throughout the course of the season, and not just at the Cheltenham Festival or Aintree or Punchestown. And certainly that is something that Ireland do better than us. They have a tighter horse population, a tighter fixture list. They also have, at the moment, in terms of strength of depth of their jumps horses, better horses. Do I think the road towards Cheltenham, do I think talking about Cheltenham happens too soon? This has kind of been like the media talking about Cheltenham. As I said, the media is a reflection, usually. I mean, we can be directional sometimes, we can campaign and all those kind of things, but in terms of Cheltenham wasn't a media construct. That was a result of owners, trainers saying, after some horses won a 2-mile 5 furlong novice in October at Warwick, oh, we hope this is a Cheltenham horse. That's what that's born of. It wasn't. We the media didn't create that. That's where that started. And yes, then it can become reflexive and lazy. I take that point, and maybe there is some blame for the media there. But the focus on Cheltenham began with the industry, and was just reflected outwards, and that was tremendously successful. I mean, people want to go to the Cheltenham Festival. You can see that they're crammed in there. That's why Cheltenham want to make it 5 days. They think that they can make it commercially successful, and I'm sure they would do for 5 days. Whether it would be good for the sport, I very, very, very much doubt. I think it would reduce the meaning of the Cheltenham Festival a great deal. It's meant to be the pinnacle of the jump season, and it's flirting with not being that. If it moves to 5 days and 6 races per day, it's shortchanging the public, who spend a lot of money to get to Cheltenham, to get into Cheltenham, so on food and drink when they're at Cheltenham. And to give them only 6 races for all that, I just don't think that would be right. And you're to have 7 races per day, you're diluting the product, so it's a lose-lose as far as I can see, apart from in the pure commercial sense. And you know, you have to be able to differentiate between the short term and the long term. I think that is personally short termism. So does it start too early? Inevitably, people start talking about Cheltenham at a very early stage, with their various horses. In terms of Road to Cheltenham as show, we make a point of talking about, I mean, we talk about whatever racing has happened that week. So we're not just talking about the Cheltenham Festival. We are talking about how some horses might head towards the Cheltenham Festival, but we're also talking about how some horses might head towards Kempton at Christmas, or Leopardstown at Christmas, or Limerick at Christmas, or Leopardstown in February. It's not just if people who watch the show will be aware that we're not just talking about Cheltenham. We're talking about all the different stopping points along the way. You know, the Ascot Chase. You know, there are lots of different things. The Tingle Creek. You know, there are many different races along the way that we are talking about that horse that's just run going to next, and whether or not it will suit them. And eventually, obviously, it does end up at Cheltenham, but that's the progress of the season. And then there's Aintree, and then there's Punchestown, and hence they have their individual shows as well. The Aintree one being quite different because obviously it focuses primarily on the Grand National. I know it's called Road to Cheltenham. I wrote a column for 6 years of that name, and that was what we transformed into the show. I wrote it originally for sportinglife.com. And then that was sort of evolved into the show with Ruby Walsh. It's got an identity that way. There is a road to Cheltenham. There's no escaping that. But that doesn't mean that there aren't turning off points along the way. And I think we do our best to talk about all of those.